Do you usually consume any sort of brain rot?
What is Brainrot?
The Word of the Year by Oxford.
Oh, missed that, sorry. So much for being a writer.
One name that I've always been very curious about is your Instagram handle. What does water coconut mean?
My late father, when people speak rubbish, you say, what nonsense are you talking, right? Except he, in his thick Malayali accent, would say, what coconut are you talking? History is not dull. People think that history is boring because they think of the textbook. But in reality, that's not the case. There's tragedy, there's laughter, there's the life of human beings. First generation of women who became doctors had to face so much opposition simply for wanting to have a medical career, which is today such a respected thing. They were actually called horrible, horrible things. I watched the entire, not one episode did I miss of this atrocious show called Vampire Diaries.
No.
It is so stupid. I could watch Vampire Diaries and fiddle with my phone at the same time because I knew I wasn't missing anything important. One vampire, tomorrow there'll be another vampire.
Hello everyone, welcome to Kitaabi Cabins. मेरा नाम Charu है and in today's episode I got to talk with Manu S. Pillai. He is an author, a historian and a wonderful storyteller. He is the author of Ivory Throne, which won the Sahitya Akademi Yuva Puraskar along with several other books. I got to talk to him about his books, history and the research work behind his work. So without wasting any time, let's get into the conversation. Hi Manu, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me.
I'm very glad we are doing this. And as per traditions, we would introduce each other with name. And one name that I've always been very curious about is your Instagram handle. What does water coconut mean?
Just this morning somebody was asking me about it. There's no grand story behind it. It's just that my late father, when people speak rubbish, you say, what nonsense are you talking, right? Except he, in his thick Malayali accent, would say, what coconut are you talking? And as a 21, 22-year-old, whenever I created that Instagram handle, I was just out of college in London in those days. I just made it like a quirky personal handle. In those days, it was just my personal account. I had no sense that one day it would have followers and there'd be other people and readers or any of that. I was a kid. I was just out of college. So I said, what coconut for my Instagram handle? And then I just stuck to it. Why should I change it just because now, 10 more people know me? I think it's a pretty, it reflects me in some ways. I quite like it.
Yeah, it's very cool. I love how you also make parallels between dehydrated and a hydrated coconut as well.
The titles also, that name's also been plagiarized by some people.
Oh.
I've seen people saying, what mango, what something else. And I was like, please, it's not a competition to list fruits and vegetables or whatever. It comes out of a personal story.
Okay, coming on to a serious question now. With so much of research shaping your work right now, I want to know what was the title of your PhD thesis?
Oh, it was a good question, because I need to remember. It was Rajas, Rani, Deity and Company. It was basically about Hindu kingship, but it was about early. So my first book was on Travancore in Kerala, but it was set in the 20th century primarily, the main characters. And because I'd done a lot of work for that book, 6 years in the archives and all of that, I knew the archives, I knew the material. So for my PhD, I thought, since I love Kerala history so much, I'll do Kerala history, but I can't repeat the same thing. So I'd go back by 1 century and go back to the early 19th century when the East India companies come in, colonialism has come in, the idea of Hindu kingship is strong in the state of Travancore. So that's the broad setting in it. So it's about kingship, queenship, the role of the East India Company, and of course Travancore's identity as a Hindu state. Where the lord of the state technically is Sri Padmanabha Swami, the deity of the temple. So it's a confluence of all these themes that I explore in the PhD.
Lovely. And how long did it take you to complete this thesis?
I registered in 2017. Then around the time my father passed away, I took a break, then resumed my PhD, and I was awarded. I finished it in 2022. Yeah, and then technically my degree was awarded 1st of February 2023. So it's been about 2 years.
Wonderful. And as a person who also comes out from the world of academia, I just want to know your opinion about how the entire academy has romanticized to a point that it's so lovely to get educated, which is true in some sense, but how difficult it is to do a PhD in India here.
It's not difficult to do a PhD. Firstly, you need to have an aptitude for it. What often happens is in a lot of Indian universities, especially, the not so famous ones or the not so credible ones, is that people just summarize existing stuff and write a thesis and pass that off as a PhD. But if you have a real aptitude for academia or for research, then you're really asking interesting questions. You're keen to go into the archives. You're keen to sort of unearth something new. either add to a debate or change something, revise a conclusion, something interesting. It doesn't need to be something grand. Often most PhDs are very granular. They have specific points they're revising or nuancing in some way. So you firstly need that flair to be even interested in it. Some people do a PhD for the sake of it. Other people do it because they're genuinely passionate about their subject and they're genuinely passionate about research as a process. So how you approach your PhD makes a big difference in terms of how difficult it is for you and how it ends up proving to be in the long run.
I want to know what really helped you during your research as a historian, because this is a very genuine question coming out from someone who is not related to the field as well at all. So in history you have oral recitations or scriptures. How can you be so sure about one thing being particular? Because oral rites keep changing on from distance to distance.
So you're always playing with different kinds of material. So as you said, there's oral narratives, there will be written sources. Sometimes for the same period, you'll have two dramatically different kinds of written sources. If you take the Mughal Emperor Akbar, there's somebody like Abul Fazl who will write some very flattering account of Akbar, but there's also a critic like Badayuni who will write a very negative account of Akbar's reign. Now, the job of the historian is not to choose a side and say, oh, this one is more true, that one is less true, etc. The job of the historian is to look at both these sources, look at other sources. What were Europeans saying about Akbar? What do we know from inscriptions? What do we know from the life of an ordinary peasant? What were Akbar's enemies saying? For example, what were rival kings saying? What were his vassals saying? So you put all of the pieces of the puzzle together. Even then, a good historian will admit that you don't have a fully clear picture. You have a slightly pixelated image. But you're willing to acknowledge that it's a slightly pixelated image, but this is how I've put the puzzle together, and this is how I've reached certain conclusions. Ultimately, with humility, we have to acknowledge that none of us were actually there. We are trying to understand the past based on the evidence we have. Sometimes we don't have enough evidence. Sometimes the evidence is very weak. As you go further back in time, say 1,000 years, on the Mughals, there's a lot of rich evidence because the Mughals existed till the mid-19th century. The Cholas also ruled for 3 centuries or so in the medieval period, before the Mughals, of course, in a different part of the country. But their resources and their material is very different. There's a lot of inscriptions, etc., but you don't necessarily find autobiographies like, say, the Jahangirnama. So the kind of material is different. So how much you can understand, say, the Cholas is very different from how much you can understand the Mughals. You can go a lot more in depth into the very heart and mind of an emperor with the Mughals, but not necessarily that much with the Cholas because the material changes. So you have to accept that with humility and then go through your process.
And how do you choose a bias for yourself when you are in the process of researching for a book yourself?
So all historians have some degree of subjectivity because we are all human beings. We have our own conditioning, we have our own filters. Sometimes where you come from not only determines the subjects you study and the subjects that interest you, but can also determine how you approach certain things. For example, one example I often give is that throughout most of history as a discipline, it was men writing history. And you'll find that until a few decades ago, most of these men did not focus that much on female figures in history. Sure. Because they were coming out of this heteronormative male gaze where they thought, okay, men, kings, wars, that's the kind of attitude we'll follow. But then you have something like the feminist movement, you have women starting to write history, bringing sometimes to the same subjects the gaze or the female gaze. And that means that sometimes the same evidence, the same material, from a different perspective, you start seeing different things. And you're able to tease those out and highlight those things. So sometimes it's depending on who you are and where you come from, there's a degree of bias or subjectivity that comes in. But you're also trained to minimize that. You're also trained to ask questions, to follow certain processes, to do certain things in the course of your research that tries to minimize the bias. There's two types of historians. There's one who will follow the evidence to reach a conclusion, even if it's a conclusion he or she doesn't like, because you're following the evidence. There's another type of historian who already has the conclusion ready because they've already decided this is what I want to prove, and then you arrange the evidence around that. Because that's usually when you have some kind of ideological position or you want to prove a certain point. And I think the first type of historian is the better one, even though there will be limitations and flaws and all of that there as well. Fundamentally, I think it's a better approach to understanding history, where you keep your bias to the minimum and follow the evidence and the record to reach a reasonable conclusion.
And on to understanding history, what are some resources or books you would recommend to someone who is not of the field at all? Like from zero, someone has to start. What would you recommend to them?
No, years ago when I was a teenager, I remember reading Abraham Erali's series on Indian history. He passed away some years ago. Very underrated. Most people still don't seem to know his work. He wrote a whole series of books ranging from ancient India, the Harappan period, etc., down to the end of the Mughals. And it's a whole spectrum. I think there's 4 or 5 volumes. And I remember reading them and loving those books because they really sparked some kind of interest in me. They were written beautifully. They were interesting. There's a sense of humor every now and then. At the same time, there was also good research. And I thought that's the good kind of public history that you need for ordinary readers to understand and engage with history. Ultimately, history is not dull. This is the mistake most people think. People think that history is boring because they think of the textbook. They think that textbook mein kya tha? There were 6 dynasties, 5 dates, 2 world wars, nationalist movement. This is Indian history. One like textbook, 100 pages. That's the sum totality of history. But in reality, that's not the case. There's so much human life. There's so much texture. There's really comical things that exist in history. There's bloody violence that's just astonishing. There's tragedy. There's laughter. There's the life of human beings. You can trace, say, 1,000 years of history through fabric, for example, just the way fabric evolves.
True.
You can trace history through architecture. You can trace history through jokes. What were the jokes people were telling? People were also telling naughty jokes in the past. It's not as if people in the past were all Sati Savitris sitting like that and only taking Ram Nam. No, they had a sense of humor. They were able to make fun of each other. They were able to have nasty, naughty jokes as well, what we call non-veg jokes. You can trace history through all of those things. And once you do that, you start realizing history is full of life. And that to me is really what attracts me to history. Teasing out these interesting questions and elements in history as opposed to just that textbook formula of looking at the past.
My introduction to history was through Horrible History की एक series आती थी. So that's the kind of history I was exposed to at the front gate.
There also used to be this thing, I don't know if it's still on, called Drunk American History, where I think the actors, either they were really drunk or they were acting drunk, and they would enact all these scenes from American history like super drunk. It was hilarious. I'm not saying we should all do that, but it's interesting. You can get people to understand the past in all kinds of ways.
You also talked about representation of women at a certain time in history. If one wants to study about women in the past, what would you recommend for them to go to?
There's, all kinds of books. There's one writer and historian who I really like is Ira Mukoti, because she really, now of course she's moved on from it, but she wrote this very charming book called Daughters of the Sun, which was about women in the Mughal court.
Yeah.
And I found it beautifully done. She really is able to bring that out to the people and get you to take an interest in their lives. And you realize that these Mughal begums were not sitting around, drenched in perfume and simply lounging around in their pearls and silks. They actually had interesting political roles to play, and she does that in a very beautiful way. Then I think it's just biographies. There are so many biographies written even of more recent historical figures, whether it's J. Jayalalita, Indira Gandhi, Catherine Frank's classic book on Indira Gandhi. That also gives you a window into the broader period. Through the life of this woman who became prime minister, was the daughter of a prime minister, had a good side and a bad side. On the one hand, she was a mass leader, but on the other hand, she was also authoritarian in some respects. Through that, you understand that entire period in some ways through her eyes, which I think is also an interesting way to approach history. So I think not only do we have more histories of women being written now, we also have more women writing history, which makes our options a lot more richer.
One question that I want to ask, just out of curiosity, is which is your favorite school of paintings? I've been always very fascinated about your stories that you put up. Would you like to tell us a little about that?
Oh, that's just, I don't do that much now, but at one point, my day job was basically sitting at a desk in the archives and libraries, just sitting there. So Instagram was my time pass. Every hour, every 2 hours, I'd pick up my phone and just do something foolish on it. So in those days, back when I was doing my PhD and all of that, I remember I'd take some old miniature painting. It could be, say, Pahadi school, Mughals, Deccan, wherever, and somehow use that to reflect my mood. So I found those paintings very useful to make my own personalized memes, as it were. But I don't think there's a favorite school as such. I just find art very interesting because, again, there's so much history you can trace through art. Paintings are not just pretty objects that people created. Paintings are, they were also trying to communicate something through paintings.
Definitely.
You find that there are these very weak kings, for example, but in their paintings they look like these very strong, capable kind of figures because it's a form of advertisement. They're trying to put out kingly propaganda. Then you have another example I often give is in the Deccan. 16th century, there was a queen called Kunza Humayun, and she ruled for 6 years. She was apparently very powerful. She appeared in miniature paintings with her husband. But then at a later period, people were somehow very embarrassed with this idea of this queen. They wanted to wipe her memory out. So they actually paint over her in those paintings. They sort of scratch out that bit and they've turned Kunza Humayun into a blob. So you have miniature paintings where there's the king, there are the attendants, there are the trees, there are all the things in the painting. But where she sat, you have a blob. So it's interesting that that painting is also telling you about society in some ways, which is uncomfortable with a woman ruling. That single piece of art is both about the presence of a woman and her deliberate sort of cancellation, as it were, by a later generation. So in general, I find art a very interesting source to trace history through. So there's no favorite school as such. I have written about Ravi Varma and his style a fair bit because I've studied that at length.
Would you like to go on a little about the Ravi Varma and his style?
Well, my favorite painting of Ravi Varma is a painting he did of his mother-in-law. He's very famous for painting these very fair-skinned, doe-eyed, classical beauties, these damsels, apsaras and devis and so on. But his portrait of his mother-in-law, which I've seen in person over the years, stunning work. Because firstly, this is a dark-skinned lady. She's got like really white hair. She's got like red eyes and she's glaring out of the painting. Literally like she's going to pounce and like, somehow like savage you. And either because he didn't like the mother-in-law, maybe that's why he did this somewhat unflattering painting of her. But I found it very interesting that this man, famous for painting fair-skinned beauties, has this other very, very striking, and to me, one of his best works, which is a very earthy, real woman that he encountered in his real life, who's unapologetic, and she looks unapologetic even in that painting. That's something I really like.
That is very interesting.
Yeah.
One of my favorite books that I like to gift people is a collection of Pahadi paintings, because I'm from Himachal, so I just take it away to people will remember me via this book.
Is it something by B.N. Goswami?
Yeah,
of
B.N.
course.
Goswami, yeah.
Yeah.
The university.
He was the best.
He was the best for real. Yeah. I would like to ask you now, just answer in yes or no. Do you believe in God?
That is difficult to answer in a yes or no.
Yes or no?
Yes, I guess.
Okay.
But I would qualify that.
And how has your understanding of God changed over time, because you have been researching on the topic for so long?
So, again, to go back to your initial question, do I believe in God in terms of, there is somebody out there looking over us and we look up to him or her and pray? Not really. Like, I don't think there's somebody out there for us. But I do have some sense of connection to the idea of faith. Because even if it doesn't rationally make sense, I think emotionally it gives people something to hold on to. I think it's been an important force throughout history. I don't mean organized religion, but people keeping faith. It gives you a sense of resilience. It gives people a sense of connection and meaning in life. Otherwise, the frank truth is we are like cockroaches on earth. Just as cockroaches come, they breed, they die. Human beings also come, we breed and we die. I don't think there's more meaning to life beyond that. We construct meaning, and that is why we're able to get through life. And I think God is important for a lot of people to construct that sense of meaning. Believing in God gives them a sense that they are not cockroaches, that there is something distinct between a cockroach and them and their existence on life, in life on earth. But the point is, for me, socially and culturally, that's an interesting phenomenon, and I find that very interesting. So I like going to old temples. I'm a bit of a Shaivite. I go primarily to Shiva temples because I feel some sense of connection to this notion of Shiva, to the idea of Shiva, the iconography of Shiva. Some places, I remember going to the Sabrimala temple where you have to climb up this hill for an hour and a half, 2 hours. And, I did it in that traditional style, in those black clothes, barefoot, climbing up and all of that. And frankly, the main temple was very crowded. But there are these 18 steps you have to climb finally. So you climb up that hill, and then there's the final 18 steps that you have to mount in order to go into the shrine. When I saw those 18 steps, I already had my sense of satisfaction because I'd gone through the process. Then, frankly, even if I turned away and not seen the main deity inside the temple, it would have been okay because I had some sense of completion when I saw those 18 steps. So faith can also be very personal that way. Each of us goes into it to seek different things and to obtain something very distinct.
Okay, this is also a wonderful place for me to introduce your new book. Manu's new book, God, Guns and Missionaries, is out right now. I wanted to ask you about the God question because of this. For everyone who is new to this, would you like to tell people what your new book is about?
So it's a book primarily about religion, colonialism, and how people's identities change over a period of time. We often think that religion is this constant, that religion has never changed, religion has never evolved. Pehle se tha, waise hi, it's going on all the way till the present and into the future. But in reality, everything changes. Society changes, that conditions the way religions evolve, etc. Religions are also evolving. One of the ways religions survive is by evolving. Tradition is also a flexible thing. You maintain certain things that are perhaps, timeless and they've existed for many, many centuries, but you also amend other things so that the religion itself can survive. So this book really, Gods, Guns and Missionaries, is about the encounter that European colonialism had with Hindu society. It's about how missionaries, specifically Christian missionaries, engage with Hindus and how that affects both sides. So on the one hand, Christianity in India is transformed because of the exposure to Hinduism. You would think that, when you think of a Christian father, you think of the white robes maybe, and you think of the cross, etc. But in Tamil Nadu, for example, Christianity was Hinduized in many ways. You find fathers wearing saffron robes, they'll wear a tika, they'll do pujas just as you do in temples. You had shrines to Christian saints where people sacrificed goats just as they sacrifice goats to Kali. You have the church in South India which has accepted caste. So an upper caste convert is treated in a different way compared to a convert from a Dalit community. Because Christianity takes a different form in India, it adapts to Indian culture and even imbibes a lot of elements of Indian culture. So much so that European Christians don't even understand if this is really Christianity anymore. Similarly for Hinduism, once Hinduism comes into contact with Christian missionaries and Western ways of thinking, and specifically under colonial rule, when you also have the white man in government, when the white man is ruling over your country, it creates a certain kind of crisis. And in that crisis, there is a reinvention of Hinduism itself. Even the term Hinduism is a new one. It doesn't mean the religion is new, but the acceptance of the term and the rebranding of the religion in the modern period is something that takes place under colonialism, and the book basically studies that.
Given the sensitivity of the topic, what sparked your interest into writing this book, knowing that this can be a little controversial?
The most interesting questions in life are controversial, right? If you're going to ask dull, simple questions, then you're never going to achieve anything, nor are you going to find some interesting new answers to illuminate life. When you go into the past, you're aware that, there is history as an academic discipline where you're investigating the past, you're trying to be objective, dispassionate, all of that. But for a lot of people, history is also emotional because communities draw their sense of identity and meaning from a certain reading of history. It may not be historically sound, but their version of history is important to their self-identity. Nations, our idea of nationalism has a very romanticized version of history, which is fine because nationalism also needs that kind of emotional history. But so you're always aware that when you're trying to study history in an objective sense, you might run up against some of these emotional sort of feelings people have towards history. But that's a risk a historian has to take if you want to do interesting work. My fear with this book was that I would be cancelled by left as well as right. As I've been joking, as I was joking to my editor when we were doing the edits, I did the first, the introduction, I finished the edits and I was like, definitely getting cancelled by the right. Then I did the first chapter and I wrote her saying, definitely getting cancelled by the left. That's how it was going. But frankly, I might have been a bit too harsh on our own public because I think in multiple reviews now they've mentioned that the book will actually appeal to both sides. So I thought I'd get cancelled by both sides, but it turns out that both sides are reading it and both sides are engaging with it because they see that I think I've been a bit even-handed. I'm not led by some kind of ideological position. I'm looking at the evidence and seeing where that takes us. Some things may upset the left but also make the left happy. Some things may upset the right, but other things in the book will also make the right happy. And I think if you're even-handed, the reading public recognizes that. They recognize that you're not going into it with an agenda. You're going into it with genuine curiosity. You have a question and you want to find an answer to that question.
And if I'm not wrong, the book is already a bestseller.
Yes, it's done very well.
Congratulations.
You've got an early print because now we've done 4 prints in 2.5 months. And I think the later prints all have this national bestseller tag, which is very flattering, but yeah, I'm still trying to push it.
It's a little dumb question. How does one book...
Dumb is fine.
How does one book become a bestseller?
I mean, obviously lots of people must read it. Different parts of the country, there should be decent sales. Funnily enough, in Indian publishing, much of the reading outside of the metro cities happens towards the south. So especially, I mean for English language books, and that makes sense because economically also there's a north-south divergence that way. So it makes sense that there are people who have disposable income to pick up books closer towards South India rather than towards the north. For example, this book is priced at $9.99. I fought with my publishers to reduce it, but papers become expensive. There's GST, this, that. So book prices in general are high. So when a book is that expensive, you need to be able to find a market that's willing to pay that money to buy the book. In terms of absolute numbers, it's actually not that big a deal. For example, with fiction in India, if you sell 5,000 copies, you're considered a bestseller in English. Because the English reading literary fiction market is so small that even 5,000 copies sold is considered wow, like a success. With non-fiction, it varies. I still remember some years ago, my ex-boss Shashi Tharoor wrote a book on colonialism. And when it crossed 100,000 copies, 1 lakh copies, his publisher put this sticker on the cover saying, 1 lakh copies sold. If you look at it in the big picture, this is a country of 1.4 billion people, and 1 lakh copies means nothing. But again, in the English language publishing, where it's a serious book, it's not a mass kind of book, it's not a book you can finish reading in one flight. Those kinds of books, 100,000 copies is a big deal. In fact, not just in India, anywhere in the world, it's considered a big deal.
Wonderful. Congratulations about that.
No, I haven't read 100,000 yet, but hopefully I will.
What is one thing people do not know about Mr. Tharoor?
He is a big Ganapati fanatic. He's got hundreds of Ganapatis in his house. Okay. I still remember somebody when I used to work with him broke into his house, and when he came out, he's like, "Oh, some of my Ganapatis are also missing," because there are some silver Ganapatis which they took off and went. He's got a painted Ganapati, lots of figurines, small figurines, big figurines, all of that. The other thing which people might know, but perhaps not the extent, is that he's a fiend when it comes to cricket. I remember because in 2014, I was part of his election campaign in Travancore. And we were working non-stop. We'd be up by 5, out and about. 6, we'd be in his apartment. We'd head out from there, barely eating anything. I remember my breakfast for that entire campaign was 1 orange, like every morning. That's what I was eating. We'd be on the road, finish by 12, 1, 2 sometimes at night. Again, have to wake up at 5. Constantly running. One rally to the next, one event to the next, one media interview to the next. The only place in this constant running where I've seen him pause is somewhere he's campaigning. Say he's gone into a shop to as part of talking to the shopkeepers, etc. And there's a TV screen, there's a cricket match. He will stop. Then we have to drag him away saying, "Sir, we're running late. 2 minutes, 3 minutes." He just want to look at the score. He'd make sure that his staff, recorded the matches that were on his TV. And even if he was getting only 3 hours of sleep every night, he'll still take 10, 15 minutes to catch the highlights of the match which had happened in the afternoon. That was recorded by his staff, etc. He's crazy about cricket.
One thing that I really admire about you is that you really do have that skill of storytelling, especially when it comes to a subject such as history, which is so factual, and for layman people to engage with it, make a story, weave a story around a certain character. How do you do that? What's your writing process, and what would you recommend to someone who is not even new to writing but wants to learn this skill of storytelling?
It's just look for the right people and the right stories in the archives in the past. It's not as if I'm fictionalizing anything. It's not as if I'm interpreting or imagining anything. Frankly, these stories are there. You just have to tease them out and present them to the reader in the right way. And I enjoy that because my own interest in history was sparked through storytelling. I've said this in multiple interviews that when I was growing up, my grandmother would tell me stories about my own ancestors. It wasn't stories of history or people, kings and queens and things like that. Just my own family members, her uncles, my great-grandparents, my great-great-great-grandmother, people like that. And just the stories about them just brought them to life, and suddenly great-great-grandparents just became interesting human beings who had interesting lives. They lived a century before me, but they were human beings. And I found that human element in history personally worked for me. It made history appealing for me. And I realized that for a lot of readers also, when you humanize the past, people understand it better. Because in some ways, you're able to see the past through the eyes of these historical figures. Yes. They are no longer historical figures in some different planet, some different time that we can't connect to. The moment you humanize them, you realize, hold on, they were just like us in many respects. They were also naughty. They had their affairs. They had disappointments with their children. Just as today's parents are disappointed with their children, 2,000 years ago, parents were also disappointed with their children. Just as today we have a sense of humor, these guys also had a sense of humor. Just as today we have people who are badly behaved, we have people who are badly behaved. Just as we have corruption today, they faced corruption in their time. So once you look at it through those human lens, the storytelling becomes very easy because people connect to those stories no longer as history in a box, but as a very lived kind of experience. I've seen other historians who are not very gifted perhaps when it comes to storytelling, and that's not necessarily a flaw. It's not for everybody to sort of marry research with storytelling. For example, academic history is not about storytelling. Academic history is very to the point. your readership is not a lay readership. It's other scholars, other historians. So you're to the point. You can use a certain kind of language. You don't need to sort of make the narrative accessible in any way. It's historians like myself who are interested in speaking to a general public. We are the ones who have to woo the reader into the history. Because the reader fundamentally believes history is not interesting. So we have to bring them in. So we have to invest a little bit in storytelling, but do it carefully, where we're being true to the record. We're not inventing anything. We're not speculating. But at the same time, we're able to give a good, relatable picture of the past. That skill comes, I think, with experience, maybe with writing. Good writing makes a lot of difference. I think in today's world, good speaking also makes a lot of difference, because there's so much now on social media. I mean, we're doing this interview, right? I don't know how many of your readers will pick up the book, but they may be engaged, say, in a podcast that I do about the book.
True.
Because people are now consuming information in different ways, and that's fine. So the historian and the writer also now has to put themselves out there and engage with readers and others through different kinds of media, not just through the book.
Do you have audio books available for your work?
I think a few of my earlier ones are available as audiobooks, but I haven't recorded them personally. This is the first one I will be recording now in February.
I love when authors record the books themselves.
Yeah, I mean, publishers have asked me before, but the frank truth is it takes so many hours and so much work that I've avoided it all these years, because I'm like, look, I've got other things to do with my time, so I don't want to be stuck in a studio for 6 hours a day reading out of my own book. Partly it was also that once I finish a book, I never go back into it. I never read it again, never look at it again. I leave it. It's done. It's an element from my own past, so I leave it. So then having to sit and read through it is a bit of a chore. But this one, my publishers have persuaded me to make the time and record the audiobook myself.
Wonderful. I'm very excited for the audiobook coming out. Do you have any book recommendations for people? Anything that you have recently read that you really like?
I recently read Angela Saini's book called The Inferior, which is about science and how science and science about women and gender itself is not rational. This goes back to something we were discussing earlier, right?
Yeah.
Objectivity. How can you reduce bias? It's not as if bias doesn't exist in science. You would think science is about the rational math and the calculations and all of that. But no, society conditions scientists, and scientists therefore bring some of that conditioning into their research as well. So it's a fascinating book about how so many things we take for granted as scientific facts actually have slightly problematic social sort of elements to it, because the scientists doing that research are not necessarily as objective as we'd like them to be. So I thought that was a very good book. I'm now reading her book called The Patriarchs, which is on patriarchy, which also I enjoyed very much. Another book I really liked is Kavita Rao's Lady Doctors. We were talking about women in history. Kavita Rao's run this very charming book. It's not very long, so it's not one of those history books that will overwhelm you in any way. It's about a series of women in India who became doctors, starting in the 19th century. And it was challenging. It's so remarkable to think that somebody like Kadambini Ganguly, she's a doctor, she works hard, faces opposition saying, no, women can't study medicine. She gets her way, finally studies medicine. They say, no, women can't work. No, she starts to work. She marries, she takes care of her family, she tries to be a good mother, a good wife, tick all those boxes, but also have a career. And it's so striking that in the Bengali press, she was actually attacked as, in quotes, and pardon the language, a slut, because she was stepping out of the house and she was a working woman. So being a doctor in the 19th century, that first generation of women who became doctors had to face so much opposition, not just from society in terms of, how can women step out of the house, but simply for wanting to have a medical career, which is today such a respected thing. They were actually called horrible, horrible things. So that book really brings out a lot of these personal stories of these women who became doctors. So that's a book I tend to recommend to a lot of people.
Wonderful.
Ira Mukoti's work, I love her books. She's written her initial work, of course, Daughters of the Sun, was what brought her to public notice about the Mughal women. But since then, she's done a biography of Akbar, which is a lovely biography. She's done now a book on Awadh and the Nawabs of Awadh, the role of the French in India, but also the Begums of Awadh, who are extremely interesting female figures. So there's, a whole set of books like that I generally recommend. I've named all women so far because this is something I tend to do. I think we do need more women writing about history and bringing their own perspectives to history.
What do you read except for your academic research?
My leisure reading is very diverse and random sometimes. One book I enjoyed reading recently was Rohan Montero's book. I think it's called The Rising. You might have to check that. I forget the title. But it's basically set in Bombay. It's mythological figures that he's sort of adapted to present day Bombay, and it's kind of a thriller, but with these like semi supernatural beings in Mumbai. And I thought that was a very, very well done, well crafted novel. I really enjoyed that. So I read books of all kinds. I like sci-fi. Who was the what's her name? Rebecca something, who wrote this book on dragon riders and all of that. It's now that there's 3 parts. I've only read the first part, but I really enjoyed that book. I read it a couple of years ago, I think, and really enjoyed that sci-fi, dragon riders, things like that. I quite like books like that.
Do you usually consume any sort of brain rot?
What is brain rot?
Brain rot was termed as the word of the year by Oxford last year.
Missed that, sorry.
Brain rot.
So much for being a writer.
Brain rot is basically when you consume absolute shit, cringe stuff
plenty.
only to not stimulate your mind at all.
Yeah. Oh, totally, always. My working day is 8:30. I sit down at my desk. I work till about 12:30. Then I take a short break, lunch, gym, all of those things. Come back and I work till about 7:38.
Okay.
After that, I switch off my brain. I do not work after that.
Okay.
I go on Netflix and I watch crappy shows. Like some shows I really enjoy, which are stimulating.
Tell us about the crappy shows.
I watched the entire, not one episode did I miss of this atrocious show called Vampire Diaries.
No.
It is so stupid, but I needed stupid. I really wanted to watch stupid. I just wanted something that did not need my brain to think or engage or like seriously clue in. Like I could watch Vampire Diaries and fiddle with my phone at the same time because I knew I wasn't missing anything important. One vampire, tomorrow there'll be another vampire. It's not going to change much. So I remember watching that show. It was completely silly, but I needed it. I needed that brain rot, as you said.
Do you know, right now, showmakers are also considering this thing as the second screen time because people are usually using their phone as they are watching their TV show. So the shows are being made as they can be a second screen for the person. Yeah.
In fact, I've noticed these days on flights, a lot of people are watching shows on flights. Like they download these shows and watch them on their phone, while we are mid-air. I still haven't gotten onto that bandwagon. I'm a podcast person on flights, or I read a book. That's what I do.
There is this one book, which is by Murakami, what I talk about when I talk about running. It gets talked a lot about on this channel, where Murakami is just making parallels between how physical exercise is very tightly knit to his writing routine. Yeah. And I know that you are also a very regular gym goer. I was going to say gym bro, but
I will live up to that title and accept it.
How has it affected your writing routine?
I think, to be honest, I remember listening to a podcast with Akash Singh Rathore, Amit Varma's The Seen and the Unseen, and I remember they were discussing how they were discussing historical figures who were not just very talented and creative figures. I think Leonardo da Vinci, people like that, who were also very much into preserving their own bodies. Like they had a sense of aesthetics about their own physiques, and they were very much into physical activity and physical exercise. And I switched on and I was like, I relate to this in a certain way. Part of it is, of course, it is a form of self-discipline. To show up every day or to show up whatever number of days you go to the gym every week requires a certain amount of discipline and commitment. There is the aesthetics to it, which is very flattering. And I mean, people make fun of gym bros saying that they're constantly posting like shirtless pictures or whatever. But the thing is, it's not necessarily just for social media validation. It is that you put in all that effort and you can see it happening on your body. And maybe it's narcissistic. Maybe there's a bit of vanity involved in it. But I think there's something that it sort of triggers your brain to then do more. So I think it sort of feeds into a cycle, and that can be, it can have a very healthy consequence as well. It helps with time management. I think it really gives me a sense of energy because what happens is, again, my job is sitting down at a desk for an entire day. So having that gap in the middle, I don't go in the morning and I don't go in the evening because those are the times when gyms are crowded. I like them to be quiet. Often I like to be the only person there. But that middle of the day, that 12:30 or 1 o'clock to 2:30 that I work out, for me that's an important time because I get to stretch my legs. From 8:30 I've been sitting at a desk. This is when I stretch my legs. I can go out, get a bit more energy, do something physical, and then come back and again sit at my desk with a bit more energy. I come back with fresher eyes. And the strangest sort of byproduct which I wasn't expecting was that it's often in the gym that I catch up with podcasts, etc. So I listen to a lot of podcasts there. But often what happens is my own writing, I get to reflect on it in the gym. Say I've worked on something from 8:30 to 12:30. I've written a part of a chapter. Then I have a break. I have 2 hours or so that I'm not in front of my laptop. I'm not in front of that text. My brain is thinking, wait, is there another way to frame this? That paragraph, should I do it differently? You're reflecting now on what you've done. Whereas if I work non-stop all day, maybe that wouldn't work out in the same way. I'd probably end up reflecting at night when I should be sleeping. So that gym hour actually also gives me enough time to sort of take a bit of a pause, move, get a bit distant from my writing, and look at it from a new sort of lens.
Just out of curiosity, what music do you listen to in the gym?
I don't listen to music. I listen to podcasts. This is very strange. People ask me what music I listen to. I don't listen to much music.
That's interesting.
I used to be into music. As a child, I was taught some Carnatic music. As a good South Indian boy, I sent for Saregama singing. I learned some Hindustani Saregama as well. I did 6 years on the piano. Got, I think, 2 or 3 grades passed from the associated boards of the Royal Schools of Music in London. And I've still got the certificates. I had a stint with the guitar, and I also had 2 years with the sitar.
Oh.
So I was really into music
That's
at one
so interesting.
point. Yeah, my mother thought I'd really go into music in a big way, and she's very big on music as well. But somehow around 17, I just switched off, and now I do not have any opinion on music. To the extent that so much for learning how to play the piano, today if you put sheet music in front of me, I can't read the notes anymore. I've forgotten how to read the notes. I've forgotten all of that. I think, that maybe happens to people sometimes. You just leave a piece of you, to one part of your life and then move on. So now if you ask me for an opinion on music, I have no opinion.
It's the metamorphosis phase.
No, what happens is luckily on Spotify, if I am listening to music sometimes, say I've heard a song somewhere, it may be in a show, and I'll Google it saying, I like this song that I'm hearing in the background as a background score in a certain show. And then I listen to that, and then Spotify auto recommends songs. So then that's good. It's an auto playlist. I don't need to worry. Similar music that they'll put together for me, and I don't need to then bother. But yeah, this is a question I can't answer on music.
Okay. What sort of podcast do you listen to? Do you have any recommendations?
All kinds. Amit Varma's Seen and the Unseen is great. The longest episode is 12 hours, which sounds very daunting. It's only audio. There's no video, which works out for me because if he's got, say, a 12-hour episode or 6 or 7, even a 5-hour episode, if I'm working out 5 days a week, that's literally, I chop those episodes. I listen 1 hour in the gym one day. The next day when I go back to the gym, I listen to the next hour, and then I can get through the whole week listening to just one Amit Varma episode. I enjoy The Rest is History, which is this British, it's 2 historians, Tom Holland and Dominic Sandbrook, who do a show called The Rest is History. There's a politics version of it, largely UK oriented, called The Rest is Politics. I wish there was an Indian version of that. Then, which is another one I listen to. Sometimes I listen to this one slightly, I think, controversial thing called not trigonometry, something else, something metry. They get guests of a type maybe that sometimes are a bit jarring, but I think sometimes I find it interesting to listen to those guests, because just to understand how other people in the world are thinking about certain things, to open up your own mind a little bit and be aware of what people who you may not agree with are thinking about certain things. So I listen to that. So yeah, it's a whole bunch. Then there's, of course, Mukesh Bansal has something called Sparks, which he started, I think, a year and a half ago now, or maybe 2 years. Had some remarkable guests, Nobel laureates, philanthropists, economics people. I've been on the show as well for 4 episodes. But it's just a remarkable spectrum of people of so many different types. I've really enjoyed that podcast as well.
Since your books are coming out, you must be traveling a lot. How do you like this new regime?
When the book is being written, it's like you're chained to your desk. You're not traveling much. You have a routine, you stick to that. I enjoy that because, frankly, I'm a creature of routine. I like eating the same food every day. I like having the same routine every day. It works for me. I sleep my best. I'm at my healthiest and fittest when I'm at home, sticking to my routine. Travel sometimes throws a spanner in the works. Now what's happened is that the book is out. The writing is done. The book is published. All of that is done. Now one has to promote the book. And it so happens that my book came out at the end of November. And it's the beginning of the Lit Fest season, right? So the literature festivals around the country happen in the winter months of the year because the weather is better. So it's just been non-stop travel since then. In all of January 2025, I must have spent 3 or 4 days at home. The rest of the time, I've just been constantly traveling, which is a bit of a challenge for me because I don't sleep well in hotels. I don't like hotel beds. The mattresses are too soft. I hate hotel food. I find it too greasy. I don't find it nice. So I've got issues like that, but you have to do what you have to do.
And when you are traveling around, you must be meeting a lot of your readers. What has been the most craziest fan encounter?
Oh, well, I have this so much for being a so-called gym bro or an aspiring gym bro, I still eat a lot of cake.
Okay.
So I keep telling people that I'm never going to have one of those like hard, super muscular bodies because I have some fat on my body because I cannot give up cake.
That's
Once a week, I
sustainable.
still have to have cake. And I don't care
Which sort
because
of
it gives
cake?
me happiness. Always chocolate, some kind of chocolate cake.
Nice.
Because it gives me happiness. And ultimately, I'm not doing fitness to, I don't know, become a machine. I want to also be happy. So I'm going to eat what I want. So I eat a lot of cake. And I think through social media, people figured this out. Which is why now I don't post that much about cake, because at one point it turned into this mini epidemic almost, where people were getting me cake. Like they were baking cake at home and getting me cake. And I remember one event leaving with 2 or 3 like loaves of cake that people had baked for me, and I was like, what am I going to do with all this cake? But of course I have friends, etc. So if I have dinner later, I'll cut the cake and distribute it with my friends, etc. So that was, I thought, not crazy. It was very sweet of people to do that, but it got a bit overwhelming when I was getting more cake than one person could consume on one trip. So yeah, that's been one of those things. Then of course there are the occasional stalkerish type thing also happens, but nothing unpleasant so far. So that's okay.
Very interesting. It was very fun. Is there anything that I'm missing you would want to add on to?
No, nothing. I enjoyed this conversation. Thank you for having me again. I was on your channel, I think 3 years ago, but that was a Zoom conversation. It's good to finally do this in person.
Lovely. It was my pleasure.